So the corporation was owned by a guy called Robert Maxwell.
Oh, do you know who that is?
I'm about to tell you.
Scandalous.
Scandal. As you rightly guess, you might recognize that name because he is the father of Ghislaine Maxwell.
Ghislaine? Is it Ghislaine? I think it's Ghislaine Maxwell.
Was it Ghislaine?
Yeah.
I've been saying Ghislaine.
Ghislaine.
That's all right, she's in prison. Welcome to the Compendium, an assembly of twists and turns involving pixels, legal issues, and a geopolitical tug-of-war in the race to own the rights of one of the most popular computer games of all time.
Ooh, what could this be about?
What do you think?
I don't know, maybe Mario Brothers?
Mario, yeah, that's a good guess. Good guess.
Video games. What other video games are we talking? Political issues? God, I have no idea.
Well, today we're covering Tetris.
Oh, that's...
Not what you thought this was
not
about.
what I expected. Tetris. Geopolitical battles and issues. Wow.
Well, the backdrop, at least, of what's going on. So, I mean, we all know about Tetris, what it is, but what a lot of people don't know is that it originated in Russia during the Soviet Union.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And it was a time during the Cold War that was in full force, and going up against the KGB didn't always end well.
What's the KGB?
The KGB.
Dude, getting involved in computer game stuff.
Yeah. The game caught a lot of attention, and so many people throughout the world, including Nintendo and Atari, were all fighting for the rights of this game.
So hang on, is Atari also... I guess we're all going to find out.
We're going to find out.
Amazing.
But what started as a simple game, basically, made in someone's spare time, sparked this race across the world to get basically the rights. And there were lawsuits, there was fraud, it involved the KGB, and yeah, it was quite a crazy one, just on Tetris.
Sounds both fascinating and intriguing.
I know. But before we go any further, should we do introductions?
We should.
For those of you just tuning in for the first time, I'm your host today, Adam Cox.
And I'm your co-host, Kyle Reese.
You're listening to The Compendium, an assembly of fascinating and intriguing things. We're a weekly variety podcast where ordinarily Kyle Reese tells me, Adam Cox, all about a topic that he thinks I will find both fascinating and intriguing, from groundbreaking events to unforgettable people. We do this all in a 1 hour-ish episode, giving you just enough information to stand your ground at a social gathering. But before we get onto the main topic, I think we should do the latest.
All the latest things.
You know, that always makes me want to do some kind of burlesque show.
I guess so, yeah. It feels very...
Kind of can and French.
Yes,
and
it does. It's really fitting for the Compendium, I think. It was good. So what you got for me, boy?
Boy, South African in you then. So my fact or fun thing that I found out this week was that dolphins deliberately get high.
Really?
Yeah.
What are they getting high on?
They get high on pufferfish.
Oh, yeah. Do you know what? I think I've heard of this before. It's incredible, yeah.
So I think scientists, it's been a while now, but they've discovered that they were, I think, passing around these pufferfish, and they were doing it
Passing around the doob.
the doob. And they were kind of, I guess, aggravating it enough for it to release these toxins, right?
Uh-huh.
And I think if they did it in a way that it was gradual or just enough, because I think it can be quite deadly, and it emits these toxins, which essentially is a bit of a narcotic. And so they'd start behaving quite weirdly, like in this trance state afterwards.
Right.
And they noticed that that dolphins deliberately get high.
See, like more and more evidence just coming out that dolphins are...
Filth.
Yes, filth. But like human-like. Like they're super intelligent. I was watching this thing the other day where this whale was giving birth, and because it was quite shark-infested waters, a whole pod, and I'm talking a huge pod of dolphins, were just circling around the whale to protect it from the sharks so it could have its baby.
Really?
Yeah, and you just see this whale like breaching out of the water. And you could see all these dolphins. I think it must have been around the South African coast. And they're just circling around this dolphin to protect it. It was crazy.
That's nice.
So that's also what I mean is they're aware. They're not just aware of their own species, but also they're aware of the world around them.
Yeah. Yeah, they very wise.
Wise.
They're the wise of the sea.
They're the wise of the sea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so.
So yeah, that's my thing. What about you? What have you got for us?
So I was thinking the other day, what do you want to happen to you when you die? Do you want to be cremated or do you want to be buried? Or do you want a Viking burial? Like sent out to sea and then I'll like fire an arrow that's flaming and then it'll land on your barge and then just set you alight. But rather than an arrow, it'll be like a Nerf gun.
And just bounce off my forehead. I don't know. I think when I was younger, I always thought it'd be quite fun to have a fancy dress party where everyone comes dressed as me.
Okay, I'm not talking about your party. I'm talking about what do you want to be done. Like, have you got a fear of being eaten by worms?
To be honest, I haven't really thought about it. I guess cremated. Yeah, pretty standard.
Yeah, cremation is quite standard in the UK. But there's this company in America that is now composting human beings. And you can sign up to be essentially composted. And the end result is that your loved ones then have like 200 kilograms of composting material.
Oh, right.
That what a lot of people do is they then go and plant a garden.
That's nice.
And they use that soil to essentially grow those plants or they plant a tree in it.
Yeah.
And it's essentially, it embodies you. It's your life force. But it just got me thinking, it was just such an incredible idea because the process, how long do you think it will take to compost a human being?
No idea.
So in this process, when you go in and they start the process from day one to the day that you can come and pick up your composting bags.
It must be months, right?
60 days.
60 days.
Isn't that crazy?
That's shorter than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. When I was watching the video, it was actually really peaceful. It feels like a very peaceful process that your family members can also be involved in as well. So what happens is, imagine like the Eden Project, right? It's like this big giant conservatory, quite light. Everything's white and clear and just nice to kind of be in, like a nice environment. And what they have is they've got all these little pods, these very futuristic white pods, just dotted around this beautiful area. And then inside is the body. And I think what they do is they put bacteria and they put like some wood chips and things like that, the right conditions to speed up the process of you composting. And your family can come and sit with you while you're composting across those 60 days. And it was really sad. I was watching this footage of this woman. She decided that she wanted to be composted and her parents just didn't really get it. And they were like, oh no, they felt a bit weird about it. So they get the call to say, you can come pick up your daughter. And they were like, ugh. And they put it off and they were like, it's a bit creepy. It's a bit weird. Like, what are you supposed to do with it? And they went to collect her. And the mother was obviously very apprehensive. And they took her around, they showed her the facilities and stuff. And then they showed her these burlap sacks filled with her daughter, essentially. And she then got it. It was a really beautiful moment because then her mother started putting her hands into the soil and touching and letting it run through her fingers. But she got it. She then got it. She was now connecting through the soil with her daughter. And it made me wonder, like, I think that's what I want to do. I want to get composted.
I feel like there's obviously some value coming out of your body at the end, right? That feels nice. Whereas like cremated is just dust. Yeah, you spread the ashes, but it doesn't go to anything, right?
Yeah, it doesn't go anywhere. And at least with this, you can plant a garden with it or plant a tree. I just think it's really romantic.
Yeah. So it's just in the US at the moment.
Yeah, I think there's a few more states that are now allowing it. I think this is more San Francisco, but it would be brilliant if that came to the UK.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
I would definitely want to do it.
All right. I know what to do with your compost.
Yes, compost me, please. It's on the record now. And yeah, I guess that's all the latest things. So, Adam, Tetris, huh?
Tetris. So let's get into the main story for this week. We begin the story in 1984. This was just before we were born. So the political and lifestyle between two major superpowers, the USA and the USSR, couldn't be more different. The Cold War had been running for almost 4 decades, and just a year earlier, in 1983, the world had another nuclear war scare with the Soviet Union.
What happened there? So, like, was it like fingers tweaking on the button?
Apparently, NATO did something which made the USSR go, what? You're trying to attack? And they were on the defense. I think they sort of threatened nuclear war because of this potential attack, which created more tension, but it obviously dissipated and it didn't go anywhere. In the USA, day-to-day life for a lot of the population was going well in the 80s. The economy was booming. There were technological advancements, including the introduction of personal computers and the Apple Macintosh. The 80s were a generation of pop icons such as Madonna, Prince, Michael Jackson, Bon Jovi. And then you had these huge American brands that were taking over, like Nike, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, right? And then you had these ongoing rights and social justice and progression for gender equality, LGBTQIA+.
Oh, and that all kind of kicked off properly in the 80s, did it?
Well, it was progressing forward, I guess.
Sure.
And so, in America, it was quite a transforming time, that decade.
Yeah.
And that was completely different to what was going on in the USSR.
Really?
So we know that it was a communist country, but for much of the 20th century, the Soviet Union actually rivaled the United States in political, military, and economical strength.
Because it was that time when people were like, ooh, communism or capitalism, which one's going to win? And they were both respected kind of political, what do you call it, like setups, economical setups.
And to be fair, it started off pretty well. And it was kind of considered this alternative to the Western capitalism. But then what happened was it pretty much started to slow down. They tried to fix their struggling economy, but what they did to try and fix it just wasn't helping, and the economy became really stagnant. They had declining oil prices, which we know is like a huge export of theirs, and all these existing technologies that they had in developing their own, I guess, environment and these future technological innovations. Basically, they just didn't keep up. And so another thing that happened, I guess a bit of a protest, the USSR boycotted the 1984 Summer Olympics in America. And
why?
Some say it was in a retaliation as America had boycotted the Moscow Olympics 4 years earlier.
Right.
Because the Soviet Union had started a war with Afghanistan.
Uh-huh.
So you've got this very weird power dynamic and struggle between the two.
It's just tit for tat.
Tit for tat a little bit. And then this war in Afghanistan, I think it lasted about 5 years. And that actually became a really big sticking point for a lot of the citizens in the Soviet Union, because a lot of the finance was funding this and people were getting poorer.
Right.
And so it was a really tough time. And so people weren't afforded the same opportunities in the USSR compared to the USA. So you can just start business in the USA, and then if it is successful, you reap the rewards. But in the USSR, anything that you did belonged to the country. Amid all this doom and gloom, however, was a Soviet computer programmer called Alexey Pajitnov. He created the groundbreaking puzzle game that would go on to become one of the best-selling video games ever, which strangely helped to break down the boundaries between the two superpowers of USA and USSR.
Really? Wow.
So let's learn a little bit about Alexey. He was the genius behind the game. He was born in 1956. Alexey really enjoyed math puzzles and board games, but to be honest, if you were a kid in the Soviet Union, there wasn't a lot to kind of entertain you. So one of his favorite games was a game called Pentominoes. And the aim was there were these 12 unique puzzle pieces consisting of 5 blocks in different shapes. And you'd have to place them together a bit like a puzzle or a jigsaw and fit them within a rectangle, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so whilst being a kid in the 1960s, he saw the space race between the United States and Soviet Union. The USSR wanted kids to be really interested in technology. So he got to see a computer at the age of 17. He studied math and eventually got a job at the Russian Academy of Sciences. Whilst this was considered quite a high-tech job, the computers they would work on were always like 5 or 10 years behind. He followed the same routine every day. He woke up between 7:30 and 8 a.m. He would eat breakfast, which consisted of sausages, eggs, and cottage cheese.
Yeah, that's a good breakfast.
Really, I've never heard of cottage cheese for breakfast.
You eat cottage cheese all the time.
Not for breakfast.
I don't know, maybe a little bit of cottage cheese on a... Do you know what? No, I've eaten cottage cheese for breakfast before.
All right.
Yeah, my mum would have these Revita biscuits when we were kids, and she would smother them with cottage cheese and put some salt and pepper on top of it, and that would sometimes be the breakfast as we were leaving through the door. Or a slice of toast and Marmite.
Smashed cottage cheese on toast.
Oh, do you know what? Smashed cottage cheese on toast with some avocado.
Maybe that might be quite nice, actually.
Yeah. See, there's a place for everything.
Okay, I take that back. So yeah, he would have his breakfast. He would run a few errands in the morning. He would get to work about 10. He would work into the night, most nights, on these really archaic machines. Eventually, he gets a bit of an upgrade on a computer, the Electronica 60. I don't know what that is, but apparently it was a good computer at the time. But it's still like 9 years old. It doesn't really display any graphics, only these alphanumeric numbers. So
it's like a calculator.
Well, you know those old computers that just black screen and green text?
Yes.
It was one of them, essentially.
God, like, it's so difficult to think if that's the kind of computer that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, how do you see the potential? Like, how could you see what it would become 40 years later? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like what we know of computers now. Because people saw the potential, but did they know that you would be like doing some of the AI shit that we can do today?
I guess not. Although saying that, what was quite interesting is he was actually working on artificial intelligence programming at that time.
Really? To what degree? What does that mean?
Well, he was working on this speech recognition software, which would go on to catch the attention of the KGB, actually. They got quite interested in what he was doing. And they're, just to be clear, they're Russia's head security agency. And they hoped that they could record these phone conversations with it. So probably not the AI that we think of now, but I guess some kind of programming that would be able to kind of detect who was speaking and stuff like that.
Sure.
But in the evenings, Alexey and a few other researchers, being the slightly geeky people that they had these computers to themselves and they'd do their own side projects. Recalling back to one of his favorite games as a kid, Pentominoes, Alexey went about making a computerized version of this game. This time he took those 5 blocks shapes and he changed them to 4, just like we know of in Tetris. And the goal was still to fit them in this kind of digital rectangle box. He called the game Genetic Engineering, which sounds pretty dull.
No, I don't think so.
Well,
Why?
It was a concept. It was the kind of the starting points. But so he wanted to spice things up, essentially. So he narrowed the playing screen and he made the shapes fall from the top of the screen to the bottom.
Which is Tetris.
Which is like Tetris. And so there was this pressure to fit the pieces together as they fell. And then this addictive part of the game that he came up with by using the shapes. You had to complete a row, didn't you? And then that would make the row disappear.
Okay.
Yeah. And so...
And that was the addictive element to it.
That was the addictive element. And so that was when he was like, well, this game can just go on forever, essentially.
Yeah. As long as you keep making lines.
Yeah, exactly. This was the early version of the game. No high scores, no sound, nothing. Alexey couldn't stop playing this game that he created. He would even play it during work hours. Probably shouldn't have done, but he managed to get away with that.
So he's addicted to his own game.
He's addicted to his own game. And this is when he calls it Tetris. And that's a blend of tetra, meaning 4 in Greek, and tennis, which was his favorite sport.
Okay, so how does that then work? So it's just his favorite sport. There's no connection to tennis.
No. So,
interesting.
Yeah, so that's where the name comes from. And as I said, there was no scoring, no sound, no extra levels. So when he finishes this game, or the first version in 1985, it gets a bit of a cult following in his office. All of Alexey's close colleagues are playing it. And within a few weeks, it actually reaches every Moscow institute with a computer. So it was kind of like pirated on these floppy disks that were like passed around, and it
really
went across the country.
How big were these files? Like, how many meg was it?
Well,
probably not even meg. It was probably
a few kilobytes. Or
kilobytes, yeah.
Yeah, you could only fit 3.4 meg on a floppy disk or something.
Yeah. The thing is, though, there's no graphics or anything, so there's nothing taking up space. It's just letters, right?
Yeah.
Letters and numbers.
Letters and numbers and a bit of programming. So Alexey, with a couple of colleagues, they do give it a bit of an upgrade. They add color, better graphics, and the ability to save high scores. And this helped it catch on even more. So by 1986, Tetris had actually spread throughout the Soviet Union, with almost anyone owning an IBM PC, which was, I guess, more state-of-the-art at the time, having some version of this on their computer at home or at work. In fact, the game was even used in studies for physiologists wanting to understand addiction based on that satisfaction of completing rows and achieving high scores.
Right. So they're seeing like probably how many endorphins are being like injected into your brain when you get a high score or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, with thousands of copies out there in the USSR, the game was a huge success. But of course, Alexey made that game under a government company in a country under a communist regime, which meant the game belonged to the USSR. And so Alexey could never really make any money off the back of this.
What do you mean? Like he wasn't allowed to sell it?
Wasn't allowed to sell it. He didn't have the rights to, because it was on a business computer.
Right, I see.
And it's not for him to sell the rights.
Sure. So I guess it's the same as like at work. There's like a grey area if you make anything at work, especially within software development. technically they can lay claim to it
Yeah,
if they wanted to, because it was made using their resources.
exactly that.
Crazy.
But to be fair to him, he said it didn't really bother him too much. He was just happy that his game was out there and it was being enjoyed. It then started to spread as far as Hungary and Poland. People were falling in love with this game sort of all over. But what was going to happen next is a string of events that Alexey could never have predicted.
Go on.
Go on. So outside the Soviet Union, a businessman named Robert Stein stumbles upon Tetris during a visit to Hungary. In June 1986, he works as an international software salesman for the London-based firm Andromeda Software. His job was to visit Eastern European countries to scout out games that he could cheaply license and sell to the West to collect royalties off that license.
That's so weird. So was like Eastern Europe a hotbed for games and stuff?
Yeah, well, these cheap games, essentially.
Did they have like people all over the world and his patch was just Central Europe? Or was that just where a lot of these games were?
I don't know. I think
up?
that's where he spent his time, because I guess that's where he could probably profit the most.
Right. When he's American, is he?
He is, I think he's Hungarian.
Okay.
I could be wrong. He was in Hungary. Let's go with that. So he was at this event, and there are a lot of games being showcased, but Tetris was kind of tucked away in a corner amongst a host of other games. Something kept drawing him back to it. He was walking around, and then eventually was like, I just need to play this game. And he could see straight away that there was some commercial potential in this game. And that's when he was like, right, I want to sell this. He approaches this institute's director, wanting to get the license for Tetris. However, the director confesses that the game doesn't belong to them, and if Stein wanted to license Tetris, he needs to negotiate with the Soviet Union, which for a Western company is way easier said than done.
Yeah, how do you even go about that? Like, get out of our country, you Hungarian scum.
Da. Vodka.
Have slam a vodka. Do not interrupt us. You are eating into our vodka drinking time.
That was awful.
That was surreal.
Surreal. Good thing we don't have any Russian listeners yet.
We won't have any now.
So this guy at the institute, he said, as you rightly guessed, yeah, you can't just go knocking up on the Russian's door. He said the only way to contact them...
Hi, is Vlad in? Can Vlad come out and play?
Well, the only way you could do it is through this old fax machine called a telex.
What? The only way to communicate with the Russian government is through a fax machine?
Yeah, basically in this instance.
Why?
Well, that was the way to do it. And so Stein decided that, yeah, he was going to send a fax to these people, not quite sure who, saying he was really interested in getting the rights to Tetris.
Okay.
The message is relayed to the game's creator, Alexey. He gets it, and...
I bet he's over the moon.
Yeah, exactly. He'd given up on the idea of selling the software. He didn't think he could. And then for someone to come and offer those rights to him, he was like, oh, great. But he had to proceed with caution because he's fully aware that he lacks the authority to negotiate the game's rights personally. Alexey admits later in interviews that he knew that he couldn't do anything for personal gain, but having that game published would be a huge achievement, right? And so after several weeks of translations and securing the necessary approvals, Alexey finally responds and goes, yes, we are interested. We would like to explore this deal further. And it was a way of saying, let's talk about it, but without committing to anything. Because he was in fear of any potential repercussions from his government. He wanted to keep the door open. But to Robert Stein, he thought this was great. I've got the go ahead. And so he was like, I'm going to go start selling these rights to other people. And that's what he does. First thing he does is he calls up people he knows within the industry. And one of those people owns a company called Mirrorsoft. Now, Mirrorsoft was the software division of the Mirror Group, which owns the Daily Mirror, as well as other sister brands, companies. I think it owns magazines and a football club at the time.
Sure. Wow, they've got their fingers in a lot of pies there.
A lot of pies. So the corporation was owned by a guy called Robert Maxwell.
Oh, do you know who that is?
I'm about to tell you.
Scandalo.
Scandalo. So he was a World War II veteran and a former member of Parliament. And as you rightly guess, you might recognize that name because he is the father of Ghislaine Maxwell.
Ghislaine? Is it Ghislaine? I think it's Ghislaine Maxwell.
Was it Ghislaine?
Yeah.
I've been saying Ghislaine.
Shit. Ghislaine.
Oh, God. That's all right, she's in prison.
Interesting. So we have like what's the other guy's name?
Robert Stein?
No.
Or Robert Maxwell? Jeffrey Epstein.
Ghislaine. Oh, Jeffrey Epstein. Yeah, we have a Jeffrey Epstein connection here.
Yeah, so
interesting.
She's the one that's associated with Jeffrey Epstein, and she's the one that actually got convicted out of him because he committed suicide. But that kind of gives you perhaps a hint into this family. They're very powerful, very influential, very problematic.
Very problematic.
Anyway, Stein thought these guys had the money to acquire and bring the game to the West. So the Maxwell Corporation, who owns Microsoft, also owns another software company in the United States called Spectrum Holobyte.
Okay.
These two entities frequently exchange titles between each other, publishing games in their respective regions. And so what Stein did was he struck a deal which meant that Microsoft secured the Tetris rights for home computers in the UK and Europe, while Spectrum Holobyte owned the rights for US and Japan.
I see. Okay.
However, Stein had signed these contracts without formally agreeing anything with Alexey. So the US company Spectrum Holobyte went to work in making some tweaks to the game. They took advantage of the Soviet origins and added like Russian artwork, symbols, and the St. Basil's Cathedral from Moscow. It's Red Square.
Oh, yeah.
Tetris was then released and sold over 100,000 units in its first year in America, which might not seem a lot, but for people owning a computer, that was pretty big.
Yeah.
So good start. But for Stein, he was getting a little bit of a squeaky bum.
What does that mean?
Well, he'd sold.
What does that mean?
Well, he'd sold the rights, hadn't he? But without real concrete proof that he had them. He kind of took it as like well, sure, I've got them, but nothing's really written down.
Hang on. That's what squeaky bum means?
Yeah, like you're like, uh-oh.
What?
That's squeaky bum.
No, I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, he's got a squeaky bum.
Is that something you're making up?
No. If you think something's going to go wrong, you got a squeaky bum.
I've never heard of that, and I'm so delighted that I now have that in my life.
So, like, think about you're at work. You're like, I haven't got that bit of work done yet.
Yeah.
You might have squeaky bum.
Because you're anxious.
Yeah.
I have to salute you. That's just outstanding.
Okay. Anyway, so poor Stein and his squeaky bum. All he's got is this fax that he received from Alexey. So not really binding. And so Stein had licensed these games to people, and it's not all above board, essentially.
No.
So he had to try and sort out this muddle. Stein reached out to Alexey, requesting a formal contract for the game's rights. But it's during this time that somehow, not quite sure how, but spies, probably, a company called Electronorgetechnica.
It's a very 80s word, isn't it?
Well, they go by the acronym ELOG, which was what we'll call them.
ELOG.
They get involved, and ELOG was a Soviet organization responsible for software exports, and they summoned Stein to Moscow, and the meeting felt more like a KGB interrogation than a typical business negotiation.
Oh, what do you mean? Was he like in a dark room with a light shining in his face?
I think it was like this really long table. They were at one end, he was at the other end.
Oh, classic Russian kind of stuff.
There's like several people there, KGB agents in the room, and he's being interrogated, and he's like having to defend himself for selling Tetris in the Western world without ELOG's permission. And he's like, I didn't even know you existed. How did I know that I needed to go through you to do this?
Exactly.
And remember, the KGB engaged in various covert and often controversial activities during the Cold War. Their spies would infiltrate the West to obtain classified information. They would spread false information and sabotage things for their own political gain. There are also allegations they were involved in assassinations to people that were deemed a threat to the USSR. There's even a page on Wikipedia where there are confirmed people that have been killed by Russian and Soviet government. And so,
none of that surprises me. I wouldn't be surprised if the Americans are doing exactly the same.
For sure, yeah. So some of the deaths on Wikipedia are people that have been shot to the head. One journalist was killed by a Bulgarian umbrella.
Oh, yeah. So got stabbed with a little bit of poison on the end of it, right?
Exactly, which just feels very like
Novichok.
Espionage, James Bond type thing, doesn't it? So there's all this on the internet.
A lot of them fall out of windows, don't they? Like, just fell out of a window.
They just disappeared.
Yeah.
So this would have been pretty daunting to Stein because, everyone knew what could happen.
Yeah.
And he's there defending himself.
But this is all over a video game. It's just weird.
I know. But somehow, through a stroke of luck, he manages to convince them to sign a contract, officially granting...
Sorry, you want to say that again?
Did I?
Did you call it a contract? What is wrong with you today?
I don't know. Hang on. It's...
Jizz Lane. What's happening? You keeping that in, though. I will mark this episode explicit.
Somehow, through a stroke of luck, he manages to convince them to sign a contract, officially granting him the licensing rights for 10 years to home computer systems. Mm-hmm. And so that clears Microsoft and Spectrum Holobyte from any complications. They can carry on doing what they're doing. Phew. Also, in 1988, Spectrum Holobyte showcased their latest product, Tetris, at the Winter Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. And among the attendees in the line to see the game was a guy called Henk Rogers. Not Hank, Henk.
Henk. That's definitely a spelling typo.
Well, he's...
Hey, Henk. It reminds me of like that episode of The Simpsons when they're trying to find a personalized little number plate for Bart. And he goes, there's Bert. And there's no Bart, though. It's like, but there's a Bort. It's like, who names a kid Bort? And then in the distance, you hear this woman saying, come on, Bart.
To her son, yeah.
And the Bort comes running away. Sorry, little Bort comes running along. So this is Henk.
Well, he's born in the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. Well, Henk now makes sense because growing up in the wild African plains, South Africa.
Oh, God, here we go. Tales from South Africa.
The Chronicles of South Africa. I had a neighbor called Hendrik.
Uh-huh.
So Drick.
Great. Okay. Anyway, so Henk was born in Netherlands, hence why he's Henk and perhaps not Hank. And he was raised in the United States. He's the owner of this Japanese game publisher called Bulletproof Software. Rogers, a bit like Stein, really falls for this game. A few years earlier, in 1985, Rogers was drawn to the Nintendo Famicom, which was a games console. So this was before the Nintendo Entertainment System. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to create a game for that system. And he manages to convince Nintendo to become an official Nintendo licensee. So when he sees Tetris at this trade show, looking for, I guess, the next big game, Tetris to him is the thing because he's like, well, actually, I can sell this in Japan because it doesn't need translation. It's really quick to kind of port over. Mm-hmm. And he thinks this is going to be a huge hit.
Interesting.
Rogers gives a letter of intent to publish Tetris in Japan on all platforms to Spectrum Holobyte. However, there was a slight issue in that plan as Rogers learnt that Microsoft and Spectrum Holobyte had already sold the Japanese PC rights and console rights to Atari Games. So Rogers is determined to get the PC and games console rights, and he flies to California and negotiates a deal. He finally gets the console rights to Japan for $300,000, as Atari was more focused on the North American market. So for Rogers, he pays quite a considerable amount for those rights, but he's confident in the success. So if you're a bit confused like I was when I was first researching this, here's a bit of a recap of who owns what.
Okay.
Elorg, the Soviet Union's software export company, they have licensed the rights of Tetris to Robert Stein, who has then sold the rights to Robert Maxwell's corporation, Microsoft and Spectrum Holobyte. Spectrum Holobyte then sells the Japanese rights and the American rights to Atari Games, who initially holds the PC and home console rights, but they eventually agreed to sell those rights to Henk Rogers in the Japanese market only, whilst they retain the US rights themselves.
I'm with you.
Cool. Good. That's what I wanted. But out of all these people and companies in this chain, poor Alexey is not receiving a single ruble. Henk Rogers, leaning into his contacts at Nintendo, he strikes a deal with them to sell the license for the game to be published on the Nintendo Famicom. And as a result, it does really well. It sells 2 million copies in Japan.
Wow.
It's also around this time that Nintendo are gearing up for the launch of the Game Boy. And so they are currently deciding what game they should include as part of the launch. Mario was initially considered, but it's thought that Rogers argued that Tetris would have more mass appeal. If you want to sell to boys and teenagers, include Mario. But if you want to sell the Game Boy to adults, then you probably should include that because he knew it had already been hugely popular in the USSR with people playing it in their offices.
Well, who's the bigger market, though? Like, you want to first sell to kids because that gets the console in your house. And then you want to then sell to adults, right? I don't think an adult's going to go out their way to buy a game console for themselves.
But this is what he thought would make the Game Boy sales go crazy. And yeah.
Does it work, I guess?
Well, what they needed to do was actually get the rights to the handheld game.
Ooh.
So that's different to the PC, to the video game console. They needed separate rights for that. So Henk Rogers now needs to try and secure this. So he knows that Robert Stein was the man that helped bring Tetris to the West in the first place. And so he's his first port of call to contact. And he offers an upfront payment of $25,000, but Stein doesn't have the handheld rights. And so he's trying to, I guess, fob him off a little bit, maybe not admit that he doesn't have them, but says, I need to negotiate or talk about this with the Russians. And Henk is waiting and waiting for a response and is like, I'm getting nowhere. I feel like I'm being fobbed off. Complicating matters further, there was also these issues with E-Log not receiving payment for anything that they'd licensed so far. So to resolve this issue, they assign a guy called Nikolai Belikov as the new director of E-Log, and he's known for being really cutthroat. And so Belikov is tasked with sorting out this contractual mess with Robert Stein and basically to get that money, which was now overdue.
So how much are we talking? Do we know?
I don't know, but I don't think it was a great deal initially.
Oh, really?
Not a good deal. Stein gets on a flight to Russia to sort these things out, and it's an opportunity for him to then get the handheld rights.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there's a rumor that Nintendo was going to be getting the handheld rights, and that was not through Henk Rogers. And so he's panicking because he's like, no, I need to get this. And so he takes the matter into his own hands and he decides to fly to Russia. But back in the UK, Microsoft also get wind of Nintendo's interest in Tetris. And so Robert Maxwell secretly sends his son, Kevin Maxwell, to Moscow. So the race is on to secure the handheld rights. But what Stein, Rogers, and Kevin Maxwell don't know is that all three of them are heading to E-Log's offices to meet with E-Log on virtually the same day.
Oh, what are the chances?
I know, right? Rogers doesn't have an advantage of having a pre-booked meeting, and he takes a bit of a risk and flies to Moscow on a tourist visa, as he just can't wait to get a business visa sorted. And that causes some issues in theory, as you're not allowed to have a business meeting without one in Russia.
Wow.
Also, Rogers has no idea where these offices are. He asks around, and not unsurprisingly, the Russians are not that forthcoming with helping an American.
No.
Rogers is surrounded by KGB spies. They're often waiting in his lobby of his hotel. And he says that he would say things in like a private conversation that would later come up in another conversation. And he's like, how did you know about that?
Yeah.
So he thinks he is being bugged his room or whatever. There's also stories of the KGB sending 2 agents to his offices in Japan. And it's not revealed why, but they're doing a bit of a background on him and his company. So there's a lot of shady stuff going on in the shadows. Anyway, Henk manages to convince one of the KGB agents hanging out in his hotel named Ola to help him be his interpreter. Henk describes her as beautiful and very perky compared to everyone else. She is able to take Henk to the E-Log's offices, and whilst driving around, Henk notices that the city is drab. It's void of any advertising, any colour. It's just these grey buildings against this grey sky. So what we picture of a communist kind of society is exactly what he said was there.
Yeah.
Ola takes Henk to E-Log, but she refuses to go in with him. Even a KGB agent doesn't want to go in there with him because he hasn't been officially invited and he was breaking a cardinal rule, trying to do business on a tourist visa. And so she was like, I don't want to be involved with this. This could not go well. And so that doesn't deter him. He's willing to take this risk because he's got it all on the line. He has to get these rights, right?
Gotta go in, man.
He walks in, uninvited, and tells the receptionist who he is. And Belikov learns that there's a foreigner in reception talking about the rights to Tetris. Now, it is totally against protocol for Belikov to meet this foreigner without a proper clearance from the KGB, and he would get in serious trouble. But given the current challenges he was having in getting payment from Stein, it was kind of good timing, and because it's for the good of the country, I guess, he thought he would take this risk and meet
Well,
Henk
let's just hope
Rogers.
the KGB sees it that way as well.
Well, yeah, exactly. And there is a risk here. Belikov was like, I know I'm probably shouldn't be doing this. But it was at a time in Russia where things weren't going well for the economy anyway. Belikov tells Rogers to come back the next day for a meeting, and that would be the same day he was meeting Stein and Kevin Maxwell. And so there was an opportunity for Belikov to play the capitalists at their own game, divide and rule. And so Rogers returns, and there's 10 people in this room, including Alexey. So he meets the actual creator of the game for the first time. And Roger picks up conversation to ask for the handheld rights after the success of the video game on the Famicom with Nintendo in Japan. He says that he's the biggest publisher in the world of Tetris right now. He can make them money, and he hands over a copy of the game. Belikov takes a look at the game and goes to Henk, Elog's never given the video game console rights to anyone. Henk's confused and goes, no, you did. Look at the back of the box. I've got all the rights listed here. And it lists them in order of Elog, Andromeda Software, which is Stein's company, Mirrorsoft, Spectrum Holobyte, and then Bulletproof, which is Henk Rogers' company, right?
Yeah.
Belikov insists, no. The only rights given to Andromeda Software, Robert Stein, was those to use on personal computers, and tells Henk, you are illegally selling something that is not allowed to be sold.
Shit.
Henk is like, what? Everything is going through his brain. He's like, have I committed fraud? Hang on, no, I've definitely got the rights. I'm working with Nintendo. I've got 200,000 game cartridges being manufactured in Japan as I speak.
So what's happening?
Exactly. He doesn't know. He's put all this money from his in-laws on the line. So he used that as collateral with Nintendo to get this deal. So he could lose his entire business if this goes wrong. Henk continues to be grilled for 2 hours with lawyers and KGB businessmen in the room. And simultaneously, Belikov and his team are meeting with Kevin Maxwell in a separate room. And they're using both of them to get information out of each other about what's going on.
Shit. So they do have the rights. They're just saying that they don't have the rights.
Well, this is where, Henk's defending himself. It's like, let me try and help you out with what's going on. There's clearly a mistake or some confusion. Because he's hanging his hat on the fact that he's working with Nintendo, and Elog are like, we have no idea who Nintendo are. That means nothing to us. And so he's like, oh God, I need to fix this. Otherwise, I'm going to end up in a gulag. And he gives them a bit of a crash course on the industry, these games consoles, who Nintendo was. And he says, let me look at this contract. And it doesn't take long before Rogers spots an issue with the contract that Elog has with Robert Stein.
What's the issue?
The contract says that Stein had the rights for personal computers and to port Tetris to different types of computers. So to Stein, that meant video game consoles. But to Elog, their intention was to license the game to desktop PCs, essentially.
Oh, I see.
And he also spots that they've got a really crap deal with Robert Stein. So they're making minimal returns. And so Rogers proposes, hey, I can give you a better arrangement. Work with me. I'll give you fixed payment for each sold cartridge, which would be much better. You'd be way better off. Belikov could see Henk was being honest and willing to make a fair deal and asked him to write everything down. And he needs Rogers...
In Russian.
In Russian. Well, yeah, they've got to be doing this through translators as well, which must have been very weird.
Yeah.
And he says, I need you out of the building quick because I've got a meeting with Robert Stein. Doesn't reveal that, but that's what he needs to do. Belikov also gets rid of Kevin Maxwell, who's also being interrogated. He actually hands him the copy of the game, I think, from Henk Rogers and goes, what's this? And Kevin Maxwell, being a bit of, a rich idiot, is kind of like, oh, that must be a pirated copy. It's got nothing to do with me, not realizing that actually his rights are all connected.
Shit!
And so
what do they say about that?
They were like, just get out, basically. And so Belikov is kind of thinking, well, I need to work out the best deal here. Stein arrives, ready to get the hands on the handheld rights. That's all he's thinking about. And he is, I guess, a bit blindsided because Belikov's like, my deal is crap. I'm not getting paid. I want all these late penalties put in to make sure that you agree to what you do and make sure we get remunerated. I guess for Stein, he's like, yeah, sure. But can we talk about the handheld rights? Can we just do that? And he's like, no, not until we've renegotiated the contract on the financial terms. And so Stein's like, okay, fine, we'll do that. And so Belikov is like, we'll draw up a contract. You come back next day and we'll get it sorted.
You said contract again.
Damn it. Henk Rogers, meanwhile, persuades Alexey to meet with him. And they bond really quickly because they've got this love for computers and they start talking about potential sequels to Tetris. And Rogers finally feels like he's got a friendly face in Moscow. And for Alexey, if anyone was going to have the rights to his game, he could now see actually this guy's the one to have it. He's the honest guy. So back with Belikov, he's now in a prime position, having 3 individual parties offer to pay for these handheld rights. But first things first, he invites Stein back to review this new contract, highlighting the financial penalties, and he makes a big deal about getting him to look at those because he secretly redefines what personal computers are in the contract.
Oh, does he? Sneaky bitch.
And he says that it should have a keyboard, which a games console doesn't have.
No.
And Stein's in a rush to get the contract done so he can then get the handheld rights, and he just signs it without checking it. So those rights for the games console are now back with E-Log. Because it's backdated as well.
Yeah.
So given how sneaky Stein had been... Sneaky Stein. Belikov now had a decision to make. Does he give the rights to Henk Rogers, who's this honest businessman, or Kevin Maxwell, this kind of slippery, slimy man, hasn't got a clue? There's no way Rogers could offer the same amount of money Maxwell could, being from the Mirror Group, this huge corporation. But what Rogers could do was an honest business partnership and a fair deal that would reward E-Log in the long term. Seeing Alexey's trust in Rogers, Belikov makes the deal to go, yep, Henk Rogers is the guy, and he gives him the handheld rights. And that's kind of a big deal. A Russian dealing directly with a guy with an American accent. Yes, he wasn't born there, but in all appearances and the way he speaks, he's American, right? And when Stein finds out, he is furious. There's not a lot he can do. He's just lost a huge portion of his rights, but he has to live with that fact. But then something Rogers wasn't expecting was a proposition from Belikov. And so this huge opportunity now presents itself, and also it covers his butt because he's already making video games for Nintendo right now. But Atari Games, at the same time, was busy manufacturing Tetris under Microsoft in the US, and they were like selling 500,000 units of this game in America. And they created this huge marketing campaign, taking out this full-page spread in USA Today to highlight how Tetris was theirs. It's one of their future game strategies and all this sort of stuff. And so they didn't have a clue that they didn't own the rights while they were doing all this.
Shit.
Robert Maxwell learns that his son has lost the handheld rights, and he is furious. And now Robert was a powerful man and very well connected. He knew the USSR General Secretary, which is like the president, I believe, Mikhail Gorbachev. Mm-hmm. Kevin Maxwell threatened Belikov and said that you're making a mistake, and he was going to get his dad to bring it to the attention of the USSR president.
I'm going to get my dad involved. Do you know who my dad is? My dad will beat up your dad.
And Belikov got a call from someone, some anonymous person, threatening, you better fly to London and you better get down on your knees and beg for forgiveness from Robert Maxwell.
Uh-oh.
Otherwise, he's going to tell Gorbachev.
It's probably not going to end up well for him.
Well, the thing is, though, he was actually scared. Like, he's a powerful figure in this corporation, but he knew, like, what could go on behind closed doors, and he could be seen as betraying Russia to the West. But to him, he could use this reasoning that, okay, he was trying to get the best deal for the country. And he also says it was a better time to do this because what was going on in 1988, the USSR was on its last legs anyway. Mm-hmm. Had it been any earlier during a less transformative time, then it probably would have been a different story and Belikov could have been killed. That's what he thinks. But actually, Gorbachev was too busy dealing with a crumbling economy that he's like, I haven't got time for computer games. Shut up. Meanwhile, Rogers knew that he had to act fast if he wanted to get the game console's rights. And so he said to Belikov, right, would it help if I bring the two head honchos from Nintendo over to seal the deal? Belikov was like, yep, do it, get it done. And so there's this really covert operation where two of these people from Nintendo have to try and leave the country without anyone else knowing. So only one other person at Nintendo knew that they were going to Moscow to get the rights.
Wow.
Because they couldn't let on to Atari or Microsoft or anyone else in the world what was going on. Rogers, with Nintendo, seals the deal, and it's worth $500,000 in guaranteed royalties and 50 cents on every cartridge. And this was like 30 times better than what Stein had offered them. And then, Nintendo issues a cease and desist letter to Atari, which is a huge surprise to them. They're like, no, we have the rights. Here's all the documentation. It's with Microsoft and everything like that. And they're like, no, you can't make Tetris anymore. So they're like, right, we're going to sue you, Nintendo. And they tried to take them to court. Nintendo gets Belikov involved, and he was going to be their star witness to reveal everything that happened. But somehow I don't think it progressed in the same way, and that the judge granted favor of Nintendo quite quickly because it was all written in black and white.
Who is the judge in this situation when you're dealing with different countries?
I don't know.
It's like, is there like a big global judge? Who is he?
I imagine he's wearing a wig.
Is he cute?
I don't know. So the judge sides with Nintendo, and Atari has to destroy everything they have on Tetris, losing them a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And so Atari are naturally pissed, and they turn to Robert Maxwell and Mirasov to blame them. But Robert Maxwell disappears from the side of his yacht in 1991.
Yeah, he does, doesn't he? Ooh, it wasn't an accident.
Well, this is what people wonder. So his body is found naked and floating offshore. The official ruling at the inquest is that he died by heart attack combined with accidental drowning. And I think people say like, oh yeah, he used to sleep naked. He probably just went to take a wee off the side of the boat and then, I don't know, fell off.
Yeah.
But others suspect that maybe he was pushed or perhaps jumped himself, because only a few days later, news broke that he had stolen $460 million from the Mirror Group's pension funds to prop up his empire. So that was on the brink of collapse, and he was, I guess, banking on Tetris saving it. We don't know that for sure, allegedly.
So who do they think that maybe murdered him?
Well, there's not enough evidence out there, but people speculate that. I think Ghislaine suspects that there's some people involved, but there's nothing proven, essentially. And the fallout of Robert Maxwell's death leads his family's reputation in tatters. Kevin Maxwell is accused of fraud and faced an 8-month trial before being acquitted. And obviously, Ghislaine Maxwell, she has a troubled story.
I know we're at the end of the podcast, but it is Ghislaine.
Ghislaine.
Stop saying Ghislaine.
Can't say Ghislaine. So, yeah, I think a judge during her trial suggested that, all these things that happened with her family have led her to Jeffrey Epstein, and so that's why she's fallen on this dark path. But yeah, there's some connection there.
You always have a choice, though.
You have a choice, you do. Over at Nintendo, the Game Boy sells almost 120 million units worldwide, and a big part of that success was Tetris. It's thought that the game was sold with 35 million Game Boys, so a big chunk of that.
Wow.
Alexey, however, still doesn't make any money from this whatsoever.
Not a single penny. That's so bad.
I know. The guy that created all this.
But surely the Soviet Union is now over, right? And he's still not made any money?
Well, the thing is, USSR collapses in 1991. And then it's at that point, Henk Rogers is able to then help him a bit better.
Okay.
And he helps Alexey to come to the USA and gives him a job at his company. Because I guess he feels a bit of guilt for Alexey not getting anything. And so he wants to help him, and he generally likes him. They become really good friends. And so once the rights, I think, end in around about 1996, I think it is, what they do is Alexey and Henk Rogers starts the Tetris company together, and they get the rights back. And Alexey, finally, after 11 years since making the game, is able to earn money from it.
Wow. How much does he earn?
I don't know, but he's got the rights worldwide for Tetris. He gets them all back over time.
So it's all owned by him now. It's back in his domain. Good for him.
Him and Henk Rogers, yeah.
Okay.
And so there's been a song about Tetris, if you remember from the 90s.
No.
Do you remember the Tetris song?
No.
Oh, look it up.
Well, now?
Well, no, not now, but
okay.
Look it up. There's a Tetris song. There's been documentaries.
Well, what kind of song? Like a theme song or like a pop song?
Well, they take the song from the games console, from the game, and they turn it into like a dance track.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
You've probably heard of it.
I think it might ring a bell if I hear it.
Yeah. So there's the song, there's documentaries been made about it. There's even a film about this saga, which was released on Apple TV. And there's been about 80 versions of this game released officially on various computers, phones, game consoles. And it's thought to have sold 520 million copies worldwide, making it one of the biggest and most popular games ever, possibly only ever surpassed by Mario.
Wow.
So thanks to Henk Rogers being a fair and honest businessman, Alexey, against all odds, given the political backdrop and drama that was going on in the world, brings this game to market and finally gets the recognition that he deserves. And yeah, that is the story of Tetris.
Wow. Who knew? So much drama.
A lot of drama.
Over a bloody game.
I know.
Between Russia and America. It almost feels like little tricks for little kids. Do you know what I mean? Like these two big superpowers getting involved.
I know. The fact that there's spies and all this, I mean, it's not really like espionage, but it's just, it felt, like you say, a lot of drama and people like double crossing each other.
Well, it was really good. Thank you very much.
Great. And so shall we do the outro?
Let's go for it.
And so we come to the end of another episode of the Compendium, an assembly of fascinating and intriguing things. If you found today's episode both fascinating and intriguing, then please subscribe and leave us a review. And don't just stop there, schedule your episodes to download automatically. Doing this not only ensures you're always in the loop, but also boosts our visibility, helping us to serve you even more captivating tales straight to your ears. You can also follow us on Instagram at The Compendium Podcast, or visit our home on the web at thecompendiumpodcast.com. We release new episodes every Tuesday, and so until then, remember, sometimes even in the face of legal battles and corporate greed, integrity can prevail, paving the way for true innovation to shine. See ya.
See you later.